Welcome, everyone. The San Francisco Law Library is open to anyone. We offer free access to Westlaw, Lexis, Bloomberg, and other databases that can help you with reference assistance. We're providing links to the resources handout and slides in the chat. Email us if you can't get this. We're very happy to introduce today's topic and speaker, who we've had the honor and joy of working with here in our library from Berkeley Law Library, here to discuss AI in legal practice, is Kristie Chamorro. Welcome, Kristie.
Thank you, Erin. I'm really excited to be here, and I really appreciate being able to come back in this in this way to the San Francisco Law Library. So I'm really excited to be here. So would you like me to just jump in?
That would be great.
Okay, super. Well, it's great to be here today. And maybe before I start, we're going to be talking about AI and legal practice. And I'll share a bit about my background. So before I came here to Berkeley Law in 2020, I was a litigation associate at Folger, Levin and Kahn and in San Francisco, and then later a senior staff attorney at the California Court of Appeal. And when I started moving towards law librarianship, I was lucky enough to get to spend time working with the awesome reference team at the San Francisco Public Library, where I just learned so much about public service and research. So it really means a lot for me to be here with you today. So my role now at Berkeley Law as the technology law librarian is I'm the technology law librarian. I wear a number of different hats, but one of my main focuses is understanding how technology is transforming legal practice. During my years practicing an attorney, I've always been drawn to that intersection between law and technology. Um, this is going to really date me. I mean, back at my law firm, I was really proud of myself that I was the first person to have a Palm Pilot. If anyone is as old as me, they'll know what that is. In all seriousness, this where we are right now with talking about AI is a continuation of how the practice of law and legal technology intersect. But this rise of generative AI really does feel like a different, I think it is a different kind of seismic shift and one that's going to significantly reshape the way we practice law. So, and I also want to share that I consider myself a very cautious technology optimist on most days. I mean, there's just so much to take in. I mean, AI is a general purpose technology. So, like electricity or the internet, it cuts across many domains. And that means there are so many real potential benefits, but also very real risks that I think we've all been reading and thinking and talking about: ethical issues, bias, privacy, transparency, access to justice, and many more. So we want that, we're going to be talking about this small area, but, not to forget that there are all these broader issues out there. And, a lot of times, there is understandably discussion about, will AI be replacing certain segments of our workforce, including will AI replace attorneys? But now the quote that I keep hearing over and over, and many of you may have heard this as well, is it's almost cliche by now, but AI won't replace lawyers, but lawyers who use AI could replace those who don't. And I do really believe it's both as an attorney and as a, a person, a human living in this time of really dramatic transformation, that we have a general at least a understanding of how this technology works. We don't have to all become coders, but we do need to understand, especially as attorneys, when we talk about our duty of competence and those sorts of things, how this technology works, potential benefits, risks, and begin to experiment with it in reasonable and appropriate ways. And I think that's just super important, and I'll be touching on that. So I'm excited to share my perspective. So I think with that, I'll jump in. Okay, so one of the first things that we will do today is talk about a really condensed version timeline of AI, just to get a sense of where we are and what came before the big release of ChatGPT in 2022. So when certainly for me in November 2022, which that was when ChatGPT was released, so much felt really new because there was just, exploded on the scene and all of this talk about AI. But I think it is very important to keep in mind that AI isn't new. And here we've got the, everything from Netflix helping you suggest shows you might want to watch to I took my first ride in a Waymo the other day. AI has been around for a long time, and we will talk about why as attorneys that's important to keep in mind. But and it's also a reason why just looking at this, I think, timeline can help put things in perspective. So, it has gone back to 1950s when Alan Turing introduced the now famous Turing test. That's something that's still used today for AI research benchmarks. He was flipping the question from can machines think to rather a more practical, can machines do what we do? And so when this came out, computing machinery and intelligence, the term artificial intelligence wasn't even a phrase yet. And I think in the materials that'll be posted, these slides will be here as well. And for anyone who wants to take a deep dive into any of these periods in history, I've got some links for you. So then 5-ish years later, the term artificial intelligence was coined. This was by John McCarthy, coined in a research proposal. And this proposal anchored the Dartmouth Summer Research Project. And this is when a group of very intelligent thinkers got together. And this was often cited as the birth of the field of AI. And then we go into the roaring 1960s. So, and actually, Aaron and I were talking about kind of practical tips. And one of the things I find so interesting from when ChatGPT first came out until now is image generation. When I don't know if anyone tried creating images when ChatGPT first came out, but it would get it couldn't really deal with letters. It was really funky. And one of the things we'll be talking about, Google Gemini 3 just came out, and they have Nano Banana is their image generator. It is really good. So I had realized from a presentation I'd skipped some bits in time, and I gave a prompt, maybe 3 sentences, and it came up with this image, which was pretty impressive. So anyway, the prompt and what I was wanting this image to convey is that the 1960s were marked by tremendous optimism. Researchers believed human level AI was just around the corner, maybe even 20 years away. I see that it was interesting that this image captured, it's kind of small, but you'll see on the computer it says Eliza, and this was a chatbot, an early chatbot created by a researcher at MIT that simulated a psychotherapist. And it convinced a lot of users they were actually talking to a real person. And again, it kind of fueled this optimism. But it turns out it was really just using very simple pattern matching kinds of artificial intelligence. But it did get folks very excited. Okay, another Gemini image, mainly just to represent that in the 70s, there was one of the first, there's a little bit talk about a couple of the AI winters, some back and forth about the exact dates on this, but there have been from the beginnings of talking about, defining and talking about and coining the term artificial intelligence to where we are now, there were a lot of booms and busts. And the 1970s was definitely a time of some disillusionment, freezing of funding and interest. The 80s, there was some more excitement. I won't go into all the details here, but I'll include some links. And another AI winter, 1980s to early 1990s, after some interest back in the 80s. Then we get to another just milestone moment. 1997, IBM's Deep Blue defeated the world chess champion. So this was the first time a computer had beat a world champion under standard tournament conditions. And this was really seen as a turning point between, this race between human and machine intelligence. Kasparov, I include the quote here, said, for the first time in the history of mankind, I saw something similar to an artificial intellect. So this was definitely a milestone that gets cited quite a bit. Another milestone. Now we're jumping ahead. There was also a period in the 2000s of another kind of bust reduction in funding, but another date that stands out is when IBM's Watson had a big Jeopardy win. And a lot of these, they're interesting. And again, in the time we have, we can't go do too much of a deep dive, but it's really interesting to think about. So this was a milestone because here IBM's Watson had really made strides in understanding natural language questions. So it used this deep QA to analyze questions and quickly form answers. So this was a big leap forward in this real world language understanding and being able to apply AI in more real world settings. And then 2016, the photo that the reigning champion just looks really disappointed. AlphaGo stunned the world by beating the Go champion Lee Sedol. And Go, this is something that's just game that has mind-boggling complexity. So for an AI system to be able to deal with this complexity was a big leap forward. We're going to talk, when we talk about terms, we're going to be talking about neural networks. And this AlphaGo, which the system here was using neural networks with reinforcement. So this was another a big moment. So very condensed, but now then we get to November 2022. So these things are happening in the background. Companies like OpenAI and Google and Meta, there is a lot of work, DeepMind, a lot of work being done on artificial intelligence, but it really was when ChatGPT launched the first version of or when OpenAI launched the first version of ChatGPT, that it just took off. They didn't even anticipate the amount of interest and excitement about it, the folks at OpenAI. So this was really a big moment. And, then going into it continued to grow by, I think it was here in less than a year, it got to 100 million weekly users. It kicked off this whole AI arms race. Google had been doing a lot of work they had BART and different AI systems, but this really, once OpenAI launched ChatGPT, it was a race for companies that they're still in. We'll talk a bit about that. OpenAI was just 2 weeks ago in a code red because Google's Gemini had really made some big leaps forward. So the arms race is continuing, but it was tipped off in late 2022. So I think it's important too to think about the timeline of AI in legal practice. And this will be short and sweet, but just to keep in mind that AI has been used in legal practice for decades as well. So, I think many of the folks watching here today will think about natural language searching and like Westlaw, Lexis, and Bloomberg Law. That is using artificial intelligence, a different kind of artificial intelligence, and we'll be talking about that, but AI nonetheless. AI has been used in e-discovery for a long time. So predictive coding and technology assisted review. So an AI model that's trained to predict relevance of other documents and, something that a lot of people will use, like Lex Machina, different data visualization and analytics. to look at how a judge has ruled, or what different law firms and attorneys have done in terms of analytics. That all of those things are using AI, and we'll talk about this a little bit more. But I want to point out that when we talk about terms, for instance, just a kind of real world example of why this matters. Right after hallucinations started happening with lawyers using AI, a number of courts came out with standing orders. And there are many, many, many now that exist about what in a given court you need to do, whether that's certifying if AI has been used. And many of these orders would say if AI has been used in a pleading as opposed to generative AI. And there was some criticism there because if you used a natural language search in Lexis, you've used AI. And I think that's very different from what those courts were trying to prevent and want certification on. And that was using systems like ChatGPT, generative AI systems that could hallucinate. So these terms in history, I think, really matter and are important to keep in mind. All right, so that's one reason why we'll talk about some terminology and key concepts, just to have a baseline kind of working definitions of these things. And a lot of this is probably things that folks here already know, but we'll go through them. So artificial intelligence, we've talked about, this has been around. It's just it's very broad, right? A computer system that can mimic human intelligence or thought. Big, broad umbrella. And again, in the slides, there's links to more details on these definitions. But I like this graphic because I think it's important to keep in mind in reading and learning about AI. Machine learning and deep learning come up quite a bit. So machine learning is a subset of AI, and that's when machine learning is about creating models that can learn from data and improve over time without being explicitly programmed for every decision. So that was different than, for instance, we were looking at ELIZA back in the 1960s. That was an explicit rules-based kind of a system. This machine learning is a big leap forward, that they can be learn without being explicitly programmed. And then a subset of machine learning is deep learning. So deep learning is the specialized type of machine learning that uses multi-layered neural networks, essentially mimicking the way that human brain processes information to handle more complex data. So the advent of deep learning is what powered things like image recognition. You need deep learning for things like the Waymos and those sorts of things. So that machine learning, deep learning, subsets of AI, and these things needed, these were some of the building blocks to what we're seeing now. And we'll talk about generative AI, which is what we're all dealing with as attorneys. And before we get into generative AI, I mentioned neural networks with a deep learning. So, neural networks, they're just really at the heart of these deep learning algorithms. Their name and structure show that they're inspired by the human brain, that how biological neurons signal one another. And, the complexity of these models is just there's some really great graphics. I don't have one here where they try to kind of signal, and I think I have one video here of, these networks are like our brains, just incredibly intricate, the way that, we'll talk about in generative AI, it's predicting which word will come next. Their complexity is really mind-boggling. And I think it's important to note that, here's an example of understanding these terms, why it matters. I mean, this is one of the reasons why, as attorneys, when we, for instance, put in a search into Westlaw or Lexis, if we do a Boolean search, we know what we're getting, right? Like you can know I've found all cases that have this phrase and this phrase within 100 words of this phrase. But with things, even with natural language, but certainly with more complex neural networks, there's this black box issue where we can't trace back what when it gives us an answer. It's very difficult. There are strides being made here, but it's very difficult to be able to trace the entire pattern of how that answer was arrived upon. All right, so generative AI. So this is the big thing that we're all wrestling with now. So generative AI is a category of AI that creates content. So text, images, video, audio, computer code, um, in response to a user's input prompts and based on training data and embodied in the AI model. Um, so this is what we're all looking at now. I had made these slide, gosh, probably about a year and a half ago, and some of these things at the time it seemed so exciting when ChatGPT could do a poem for you, and now that just seems so quaint, and things are a lot different now. But nonetheless, it could still do poems. So this is a little bit older too, but this just when it first came out, this is Sora, OpenAI's video generator. This just blew my mind when I first, this is the prompt here, a stylish woman walking down a Tokyo street, and we'll read the whole thing, but that it created this very realistic image. And I'm sure many of you have been also thinking and reading about, we're talking today in great part about the technology of law, like how talking about how generative AI impacts legal practice. There are so many substantive issues with this new technology and new era that we have to be thinking about, and a huge one is deepfakes and evidence, because these systems can create such realistic looking video, audio, and it's changing every day. So we don't have too many more terms, but another one that's important, and I think we've all been hearing about this too, is a large language model. So this is a type of Gen AI that's trained to understand and generate human language. So this video is, just a little snippet, showing in part these complex relationships in these models. And I think the next slide, let me just, I think I actually don't, I'll go back to this one. It is important to keep in mind with large language models that really, what these models are doing is they are using these complex systems to predict what word or what portion of a word will come next, based on a really complex variety of factors. So this is one of the reasons why we've all seen, and we'll talk about hallucinations, that you have to be so careful because the things that can be completely wrong sound so plausible because of this prediction with words. Okay. And I think I stole this with attribution from Pablo Arredondo. He's the co-founder of Co-Counsel and is just really an amazing person in this space. In a presentation that he gave, he was pointing out that it's really important to remember the word, maybe generative AI isn't the best term to use to explain all of this, because LLMs do so much more than just generate text, right? They can understand, summarize, and again, some of these, I don't mean to give human attributes to these systems, but for lack of better words, understand, summarize, translate, classify, predict. We'll talk about different kinds of AI, but I think it is important to keep in mind this ability to quickly deal with large amounts of text and how that can help us as attorneys and what risks we have to think about. So not too many more terms, but it is a good idea to keep extractive AI is something that's important to keep in mind, especially when we will be talking about systems like Lexis and Westlaw. So this is an older type of AI, but it's been around a little bit longer, but it uses natural language processing to identify and extract key phrases and sentences from large volumes of documents and then retrieve relevant text. So it's using this its capabilities to when you do a natural language search on Westlaw or Lexis to pull up the cases or statutes that are relevant to your query. So that's part of what these new Lexis and Westlaw and other systems do. But it's now changed when you put extractive AI with generative AI, and we'll talk a little about that. And I mentioned a couple others a few slides ago, predictive AI. So, predictive AI is a different type of AI in many ways than generative AI. So this is a category of AI that learns from historical patterns to predict future outcomes. So, there are a lot of predictive AI systems that there's been a lot of scholarship and discussion about problematic outcomes of these systems. Things like trying to predict, who might commit a crime again, who might default on a mortgage, who will be, a stellar employee. There are problems with these systems that are inherent in predictive AI, inherent in trying to predict future outcomes. So, and I think I have it here in the next slide. It's important to understand, as we're all, that just this past week, there's been a lot of news about regulation of AI, and that understanding the type of AI is going to matter in a lot of this. So, just like in this slide, you wouldn't be regulating and dealing with all types of vehicles in the same way, right? Cars are very different than bicycles. In the same way, predictive AI has issues that are not present in generative AI and are different from. So there's a great book, AI Snake Oil, that I think I might have in the materials, but it talks about risks and talks about a lot about predictive AI and points out that it's important to understand that some of the risks inherent in these systems are not inherent in other types of AI systems. So I do think that's really important to keep in mind. All right, so I touched in the beginning on lots of risks and ethical issues, and we're going to touch on these. One of the main things as attorneys that we are, since the beginning of this, is hallucinations. In Gen AI, outputs that appear logical and coherent but are actually incorrect or nonsensical. Again, this is pointing out that it's predicting the next word. It can easily these systems hallucination. The phrase that always comes up is hallucinations are a feature, not a bug of Gen AI, and that this is what these systems are supposed to do: predict words. They have no sense of what's real and what's not, right? And it's our job to be able to understand how tools are mitigating this risk and how we can use our regular or check our sources as attorneys in ways to minimize this risk. So I think everyone's probably heard about Stephen Schwartz, the chat GPT lawyer. This was back in 2023. One of his quotes, I heard about this new site, which I falsely assumed was like a super search engine. And, this attorney had, in the Avianca case, had cited to completely non-existent cases. He attached to some of the pleadings, if you can go back and look at the order to show cause, he's conversing with ChatGPT. Are you sure this is a real case? Yes, it's available on Lexis and Westlaw. And it is actually, worth, I might put these in the materials. taking a look at, even though the systems are really a lot different now. He was really convinced, but he had the duty to check the cases that he was putting before the court. Michael Cohen, this was also back in 2023. Google Bard had given a previous version of Google's AI, he had submitted false citations, and the headlines really just keep coming. I think I have, yes, great. I have a link to, this is a really cool tool created by an attorney, pretty sure he's in Canada, just going through all of the hallucinated cases. I think it's almost at 600. Oh, here it is, 640. At the time I grabbed the screenshot, and it's I just there were just a number this past week. So even though it does seem like, all right, we know this can happen, this is still happening. And we just don't have the time to get into the other significant risks and limitations, but it's important to keep them in mind. Bias and toxicity. So Gen AI can reproduce and amplify all kinds of biases that are present in its training data, present online. Environmental impact. This is, really important to keep in mind. I think I feel I have some hope that with all of the headlines about data centers being built, and these systems consume an extraordinary amount of energy and resources. One of the things we used to talk about in presentations that was, this is a little bit old, but still I would think true. Generating one email on a system like ChatGPT takes, the Washington Post reported, takes a water bottle worth of water to cooling. So these are not without environmental impacts. That's one of the reasons I don't, even though it's tempting to put new, fancy generated images in these slides, I don't. But I think there is more and more out there on benchmarking, so users can understand, okay, what is the impact of things that are more data intensive, like generating a video versus running a search on Lexis or Westlaw. Some more data on that being put out to us as consumers so we can make more informed decisions. And I also think what I've also been learning about, as models are able to be, as smaller models are coming out, that can reduce the amount of environmental impact. More, smaller, more bespoke models for certain kinds of tasks. So I hope there's a little glimmer of hope there, but it's a significant environmental impact. Labor and fairness. I mean, Gen AI relies on low paid data labeling, often in other countries. So there's a lot of issues, and these people doing this are exposed to can be exposed to really intense content. And so there is concern about worker exploitation and inequities. Misinformation and deepfakes. We touched on that with the Sora video. I mean, every day we're all seeing it, easier and easier to generate convincing fake content. A lot of serious implications there. Lack of transparency. We touched on the black box problem, that we don't know exactly how these hidden layers work. But that's another one where if anyone has been using the deep research tools, where you have that side, you can see the AI agents working a bit along the side there. It's not giving you the full rundown of what's going on, but you're getting a little bit of snippets of kind of how the systems and what they're doing, what they're looking at. And then a huge area that we see all of these New York Times, Perplexity, all these lawsuits, IP and copyright, legal risks from both data used to train Gen AI and the content it generates. And there are, as attorneys, there are a number of duties and rules that we need to be thinking about beyond the scope of this presentation. Maybe Aaron will do one on this another day, but legal organizations are providing more and more guidance. This is just the link to the ABA opinion in 2024. So we are getting more guidance on this, but a baseline is that we don't need to become, as this opinion states, Gen AI experts, but we do have to have a reasonable understanding of the limitations of these systems and the capabilities as they become more and more woven into legal practice. So that duty of competence is there. And yep, here we are. So we need to stay up to date. And there is a lot to stay up to date on. I'm going to provide some resources on that, but we are in a time of change. So I think it is very important to stay as up to date as you can. And also we'll talk about experimenting with tools to get a kind of hands-on understanding. And I hope everyone's been thinking about duty of confidentiality. I think, folks understand that putting client material into a general purpose tool like ChatGPT does not preserve the duty of confidentiality. And that's where a lot of these tools, like, whether it's Harvey or Lexis, Westlaw, they are emphasizing their privacy and confidentiality protections. But anytime you're looking at a new tool and you're talking about client data, you need to ask these questions here. All right, so now just diving into the Gen AI landscape of where we are. So the main players, so these are general purpose Gen AI models, large language models. Sometimes they're called the frontier models. So I can't really poll here, but I'd be curious, there's ChatGPT, OpenAI, we've got Anthropic's Claude. Claude has been in the news quite a bit. It's also been making some big strides in its capabilities. It's interesting, Claude recently has been in the news a bit just with their, as these companies are maturing and figuring out their kind of target audience, that Claude has been doing a lot with APIs and going directly, being able to provide systems, for companies, using Gen AI for, larger tools. Some have said that, their personal, consumer model is somewhat secondary. And some have pointed out that can have a benefit because it's not as some folks are saying ChatGPT is really trying to keep you drawn in and keep prompting you with, do you want to do another query? And Claude, some say, is a little more neutral with that, but still a really powerful model. They just came out with their Opus model or an update to the Opus model, which in benchmarking is doing really well. And Claude is also known for its they refer to it as constitutional AI, really wanting to create safeguards and sort of their touch points for how they are handling some of the ethical issues. And a lot of folks who code, Claude has really strong coding capabilities. Gemini is Google's system. They came out recently with Gemini 3, which also is performing very well. Folks are saying it's very powerful. That caused a couple of weeks ago ChatGPT to go into their code red, where Sam Altman said, we're going to stop some of this other stuff. We're going to go back to our core model and improve it. And so they came out with their new upgrade to their main model. So there's this constant arms war. Llama is Meta's model. This is interesting that it's an open source model. Companies can use portions of the model, where one of these, DeepSeek, a Chinese company, there was about a year and a half ago, discussion about whether DeepSeek used portions of Llama. Grok is XAI's model. And Copilot is in here because it's a general purpose tool that a lot of people have probably used with Microsoft, and attorneys are going to be using it a lot. But it's important to keep in mind that Copilot is not, Microsoft doesn't have its own large language model, but rather they use ChatGPT and other models. So a big stride came and when these models developed reasoning capabilities. So this was a leap forward. And now most everything you'd be doing on one of these frontier models is going to be using this reasoning capability. So basically, it's a slower, more deliberate versions of LLMs that spend extra compute sort of thinking through multi-step problems, rather than in the first version of ChatGPT, you'd put your prompt in, it's going to do all of that compute in one time. And these reasoning models really kind of, and that's why you'll see some of these models say, we'll get your answer in a minute. It breaks it down step by step in a way that earlier models couldn't. And the reason why, and I'm trying to tie this back to why is this important for us as attorneys, is that these reasoning models did really up the game for the way lawyers are being able to use them through tools like legal research products and others. I linked to a study that was revised in March of 2025. And it talks about how these AI-powered lawyering, how these AI reasoning models improved some capabilities. And then another thing that I think now, it's changing a bit, but it's important to keep in mind that the way we might be interacting, I know for me, just in my day-to-day life, is through search tools, like Perplexity. So for those of you who haven't used Perplexity, that is a tool where you can search, sort of an alternative to Google, find me great Mexican restaurants in Oakland, kind of a thing. And what it's doing is using different AI models. It's not its own AI models, but to do search in a different way, give you an explanation, and use the ability to understand language to, they would definitely say, to give you better results than a traditional Google search. And this was back in March. Time's flown by, but one of my favorite podcasts is Hard Fork, New York Times tech podcast. But I think this was when Perplexity and some of these and ChatGPT were weaving in their own search functions that, this could really change the way we think of, Googling, that it's going to look a lot different. And most people, I think, have seen in Google when you get that explanatory bit, which can be not so helpful or helpful, depending on the prompt and the time. But it's important to keep in mind that these search tools are part of this landscape that we're working in. All right, so let's talk a little bit about AI specifically in legal practice. So one of the big tools is Westlaw. And they have there's been some rebranding of the AI products that they have, but Westlaw, and I'm just going to cheat and check. No, I only have one slide. Westlaw has a number, depending on which plan you have. They have their AI capabilities now woven into Westlaw Advantage, where you can, here I'm asking, what are the standards for constructive termination in California? You can select a jurisdiction, and you can run your prompt, and it's going to use generative AI to come up with your search results. There have been this AI deep research is a newer version where we're going to talk about agents a little bit, but where they're using now some of the more advanced models to power their legal research platforms. And when you're using something, and I don't think I have a slide, I do. Actually, I'm going to jump ahead. I do have a slide on retrieval augmented generation. This is the last term, I promise. It's important to keep in mind that Lexis and Westlaw, all of these tools that are doing legal research or most are using it's referred to as RAG sometimes, retrieval augmented generation. So basically, you're entering a query. What are the standards for constructive termination in California? It's going through and it's using some of the old-fashioned AI, extractive AI. It's, querying its corpus of text. So it's not getting stuff from the internet, right? It's just looking at Westlaw content, understanding your search, pulling those relevant documents, and then using generative AI to, answer that query that I've given and give me an answer rather than just listing out the cases for me, generating an answer of what constructive termination is in California. I'll go back to the slide, in this box. And using, and then you can say things like draft me a client letter based on this. You could do all these things with language. And I'm jumping around a little, sorry. But it's important to keep in mind on the slide, I linked to a study that was in 2024, but assessing the reliability of legal research tools. This was, granted, this was a while ago, and there have been a lot of improvements, but they looked at, that this retrieval augmented generation where it does reduce hallucinations. So when you're working in a Lexis or Westlaw, getting a completely made up case shouldn't happen. But what can happen, they still said there were, rates of hallucination that were still somewhat significant, that the hallucinations can be things like maybe it was pulling out a standard on constructive termination that was from a dissent in a case, or it is giving me a proposition and then a citation to a case, but that paraphrase really isn't accurate. It's not capturing the holding of the court. A lot of different, the definition of hallucination, I think it's so important to keep in mind that it can mean more than just the completely made up case that the Avianca attorney had the problem with, but rather, the description you get of the answer can be incorrect. So, these are getting better and better with these systems, but it is important to keep in mind that these systems they use where it's grounded on their content don't eliminate the need to check and make sure that everything that you're going to be using in your legal practice, in a brief, that sort of thing is correct. So there's, Lexis and Westlaw have their systems. I think it's important to keep in mind that there are a lot of, there's a lot of great work, especially when we're here at San Francisco Law Library, to be talking about access to justice. And companies like Describe AI is a wonderful company that is using AI to create, they have free search tools where you can they're using generative AI to be able to work with case law, do searches. They can do things, one of the things that generative AI is really good at is being able to translate information. So maybe taking a holding in a case and taking it from legalese to, you can say, I'd like this to be at a, ninth grade reading level, or I need you to, translate this into Spanish. That I think is a generative AI's ability to make legal terms and legal information more accessible is exciting. And, there's, these tools that we're touching on, Westlaw, Lexis, sort of the Harvey, they are really exciting, great tools. They're expensive right now. So there is good work being done by groups like Describe AI. Free Law Project is another wonderful organization that's doing a lot, and they actually partner with Describe AI. So I want to make sure that, another thing that Aaron would be great to do is kind of access to justice. There is a lot of, I have a lot of hope there. And not to forget those tools when we talk about the big players. So this is showing some of the things. So we talked about, legal research and AI is kind of what we were talking about at first. And that, for me working at a law school, that's where our students, that can be their first touch point with dealing with generative AI, is how it can come into play when they're doing legal research. But, as practicing attorneys, there are so many other ways I think that you have already engaged with this or might in the future. So um, AI can be very good at document summarization, and being able to, through your prompt, give more detailed information about what you want to find in a document. So things you can be doing this on the general purpose models like Claude or ChatGPT. You could be asking it, uploading. For instance, we do a lot here at the law school with legislative history. I've got a 2,000-page document that I, am not going to be able to get through in, a few hours, but I can use a Gen AI system to ask, was there testimony on this certain issue, and go beyond sort of a control find, and be able to extract information. Will it catch everything? Um, it it might not, and there's a lot of benchmarking going on, but it can be a very helpful tool with summarizing documents. And these tools like Lexis or Westlaw and others allow you to do this in a secure environment. So you could be, putting in client documents and getting summarization in a secure environment. And I touched on, I think it is really helpful that we're getting more benchmarking on how well tools are doing some of these different tasks. Um, and so with summarization, I do think one of the things that's helpful is that I touched on this, you can control the lens. So you can ask, you can work with the model on what you need it to summarize. And that can be very helpful for certain kinds of work. And this is, the next level of this is reviewing large sets of documents or databases of documents. So this is we're talking here, would be talking about discovery and those sorts of things. Everlaw is a company. They just came out with a discovery company, and they do a number of things. Deep Dive is a new AI, I've linked to it, feature that's getting quite a bit of buzz. Everlaw is also doing a lot of work in the access to justice space, which is great. They have their Everlaw for Good to be able to allow folks like journalists who, have to deal with large amounts of documents and be able to query and get information. An example that I mentioned Pablo Arredondo, the founder of Co-Counsel, now part of Westlaw. When he came to speak to one of our legal research classes, he showed one of the first demos that sort of just blew my mind. Was he uploaded all of President Obama's speeches and asked the system to find instances of humor. And it went through in a reasonable amount of time. Here was some sarcasm, linking back to the documents. Here was, this instance, and, finding that's an example of being able to work with documents in a way that is so different from what I'm used to, back when I was doing discovery with keywords and, even with TAR and those sorts of things. That ability to work with language in a really new way is, I think, going to change a lot of the ways that reviewing large sets of documents. And this is an e-discovery, as we mentioned. So being able to, do things like you have a large corpus of documents. I need a timeline on this. I need relationships. I need, all of these different workflows are changing quite a bit. All right. Another thing that I went to the ABA Tech Show last year, and some of these links are, from last year, and there's a lot of new tools, but there was so much buzz on depo preparation and real-time deposition assistance. So, real-time transcription and analysis where, rather than having to, an attorney holding everything in your mind and trying to, wait, what did the witness say about this? What's my follow-up? Being able to work with that transcript in real time and maybe ask, what was said about X, and follow-up questions. I mean, I think we're going to see more and more about how lawyers might be able to sort of on the spot refine questions. It's interesting. This has raised some issues about unauthorized practice of law. Some have argued that this is, it's bringing in a tool that's making legal calls. Is that the attorney's legal call, or is it like, giving a suggestion and then the attorney decides whether or not to ask that follow up? This is an area where I think we're going to see a lot of AI, new tools, and we're going to have to do a lot of benchmarking and assessing as to how helpful these are. And, I just will quickly say before I go further, again, wanting to think about access to justice. There was a presentation about a year and a half ago about, I think it was the Innocence Project, was talking about they were given, so a lot of these companies are generously, allowing public interest groups to use the tools. And it was a really, it resonated. The person speaking from the Innocence Project was talking about, like, look, I've got 5 lawyers working on all of these death penalty cases, and if I can have a tool that can help me find, let's say, inconsistent statements in, a huge corpus of documents, that it's not going to do all of the work we need to do, but it really can help us get through, especially when we're under resourced, some of these, really labor intensive tasks, like, dealing with large sets of documents. So that's, I think, important to keep in mind. We talked about translation. That's a huge strength of AI, being able to more easily and accurately translate documents between languages. This is VLEX, which has now been, there was $1 billion deal, I think, with it was a huge deal with Clio. So VLEX is now part of Clio, and that's another trend we're seeing where sort of they were talking about the business of law at the Clio conference, which was a couple months ago, maybe 3 months ago. The practice of law and the business of law, these bigger platforms, I think we'll be talking about this briefly, coming together, where you're doing, where some lawyers might now be working in one system where you're dealing with your knowledge management and with your, legal research or translation, that sort of thing, in one system. But VLEX is another big one. Their AI product is called Vincent. And we talked about that when you're using a platform, this is that constructive termination example I had used, is that, once you have these elements, you can then ask it, all right, now please draft a letter to opposing counsel, and that's what these workflows we're going to all figure out. Does that get, when do you use this in more sort of rote kinds of mechanical writing that you feel comfortable delegating and then checking from the AI, versus, creative legal writing where you might not feel as comfortable using these systems, but it is there and they can help with that. And then a big stride is these knowledge management and in other internal law firm tools, Harvey, Legora. Some firms have, and these are mainly in larger firms right now, but firms are developing their own. So where you're more able to deal with your own internal work product and be able to create and use that product in different ways. So I know we're getting close to the end here, but want to talk a little bit. Part of this is what the future holds for AI and legal practice, and there's so much that's exciting to talk about. I actually have to remember I went to a great talk last night. A book I recommend, and maybe Aaron, I'll put it at the end, is The Worlds I See. Dr. Fei Li was in San Francisco yesterday talking about the future of AI, and I just learned that she was named along with think it was 7 other AI researchers as Times Person of the Year was a group this year. But it was a really interesting discussion of what the future of AI holds. But for legal, we'll touch on a couple things. One are, I think so many legal products are talking about AI agents now. I'm just hearing that constantly. An AI agent, it's kind of it can be a broad definition, but basically a software program that can plan and carry out tasks with some autonomy. So you're not supervising it. Just like when you're doing some of these different deep research reports, what says like in Westlaw, I'll get back to you in 10 minutes. It's doing searching and summarizing on its own without you actively supervising. This was in January. OpenAI released its operator that doesn't, so far, I don't think it works so well. I haven't tried it in a couple months, but basically you can do things like, I think here, find me and book a tour in Rome on TripAdvisor, and it will actually take over your browser and yeah, and make the reservation. Maybe these will get really good. And a lot of people who have worked with these, it felt like you had to check it and then it didn't really save a lot of time, but it was kind of mind-blowing to see it, in this window take control and actually be doing these things. And that's, AI, there's a lot of talk in legal. I was just listening to a podcast, a legal tech podcast where, they were saying, a couple years, lawyers, you're just going to go to sleep. The AI agents are going to be working, overnight, getting your things done. Again, this autonomous kind of work. And that's where these deep research tools that I've mentioned a number of times, these are, tools that are really, changing the way and using these agents to be able to like go out, if you're just using a general purpose tool and do, what would have taken hours of research. It's not going to find everything, and it might be finding sources that are not what you're looking for, but they're getting better and better, and they are using agents to complete this. And a thing that I think is really, really interesting, Megan Ma is someone who I follow because she is doing really interesting work at Stanford on AI, is attorney training and mentorship. She did a program where she's basically been experimenting with taking an attorney's work product in a secure environment, maybe an M&A attorney, taking that attorney's notes and drafts, and maybe I'm sure she kind of interviews and what's your strategy about how would you approach this particular task, and creating one of these smaller models. So when a new attorney is going to meet with partner A, before meeting with that partner, they can maybe interact with that model, and ask some questions. Maybe they've been giving their first, they have to do part of a contract draft, and they can ask some of those basic questions, and this model will answer in the style of the partner. And then they're a little more, maybe it gets them 30% of the way there. And then when they actually meet with that person and interact, they have some understanding. It's hard to get my mind around, but I think it's really interesting work that she's doing. And some of the other trends, hopefully decreased cost in AI tools. I talked about this. I'm hearing so often this from different, whether it's bigger platforms like Harvey and Clio, mainly those bigger platforms. But I think that this is going to trickle down to, to smaller firms, even, solo attorneys. This convergence of the practice of law and business of law, having, if you choose to use these tools, a tool that can be helping with kind of monitoring email and client correspondence, and also the tapping into a legal research tool, that sort of thing. And the third bullet point, another term I've been hearing in some of these recent conferences, context aware AI. These AI systems are getting better at memory and sort of understanding, maybe your writing style, your practice area, the context of this particular client. So you're not in your prompt in working with these systems having to constantly give all of that information, that it's aware of that and can hold that general context and produce more answers that are more tailored to what you're asking of the system. Okay, oops, sorry. A few closing thoughts. I feel like I'm going a little over, so I'll be quick. Um, so one of the people at I think the last slide is some of the folks I follow. I think Ethan Malik from Wharton is terrific. He will touch on law, but he is just very practical at looking at, AI and what's happening. And he has written a book, and he has a great blog, One Useful Thing. But he talks so often about this jagged frontier of AI, and that is that AI is something that it can be extraordinary at something, and then really just be terrible at another. And that this frontier between what it can and can't do, or does well and just makes a lot of mistakes, is constantly changing. And the way you need to understand that frontier is to try to interact, even with, it doesn't have to be interacting in a legal setting, but you could do things like I was planning a trip, and a couple of the things on Gemini was like, oh my gosh, it was amazing at maybe brainstorming these different ideas and really excelled at that. But then you see it, for me, it completely botched. These systems are not great at specific info. It made up an email, it made up a phone number. That got me into some trouble on my trip. So you start to learn how this frontier is evolving, even with interacting with tools that are more basic, or in more sort of everyday ways. This is a post that's so good. It's really worth reading about 15 times to use AI, 5 not to. A lot of these really relate to legal practice. Maybe an example being a thing that AI is really good at is brainstorming and making novel connections. So you're, let's say, preparing for a deposition, you've got a secure system, you upload your files and your depo outline, and you say, okay, give it some context. What have I forgotten to ask? And maybe it can help you. Yeah, I should have touched on this. It can be great at brainstorming. Thing it's not good at is if you don't have expertise in an area, and mistakes have a high cost. You might not recognize that mistake if you don't have expertise. A lawyer just putting in a prompt about, an area they're not familiar with and just relying on the output. That is not a great time or way to use AI. So this, I think, is a really worth your time to look at. And this is just my pitch of just experiment with using AI for routine tasks, because I really think you can start to see, all right, here's something where it can really save me time, even something very routine that can free up time to be doing more creative legal work. And I know we're running out of time. We talked about, and I've been trying to touch on the access to justice crisis. Some information here. It is, this middle, there's just this huge swath of our society that can't have their legal needs met in an appropriate way. And I do think that there's hope with this mismatch between available resources and needs, that some of these tools like templates, court forms, making law more accessible. This is a quote from Justice Roberts back in 2023. I have hope that there is some ways that this will happen. There's a professor here at Berkeley who's doing really amazing work in this space, and I've cited to some of her work for those of you who want to look at the slides. Colleen Chen and Miriam Kim, who's a lawyer here in San Francisco. And these are some resources that I've created that you'll have in the slides. And thank you. And you can always reach out to me if you have questions. I have to apologize because I think I went a little bit over, but it's been great to be here, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Well, thank you so much, Kristie. I learned so much, and thank you for the great resources. And I will put the words I see in with the resources that we have available to the
Great.
attendees. And if you had a couple of minutes, we do have a few questions from the chat.
Sure.
Great. So uh, uh, someone would like to know at what point there would be a reliable way to tell whether AI has done an accurate and better job of doing something than you could have done on your own.
Um, yeah, I think it's the lawyer, it depends. I mean, there's so many ways that AI can be used. I don't think, I'd love I think that question. Think we're going to find workflows, and this is where the experimentation comes in, where you've done it enough and you feel like there's a way to quickly check the output, and you feel like this in doing this, I'm able to get a more reliable answer than I would be able to on my own without that tool. Or Ethan Malik always talks about sort of when you use it as a collaborator, when it's better than the best available human that you would have to help you with that task. And with benchmarking, with these workflows, we can get confidence in, okay, this outcome is better than I can do on my own, but others, I think we're going to find that many others as lawyers, the human part of being a lawyer, these AI systems are never going to get it better than us, I think.
Thank you. And I probably should have finished the context that he gave with a
Oh,
little
yeah.
more, but you probably just answered a
Yeah.
lot of that. So continuing, will it ever be a trustworthy substitute
Mhm.
for experience and common sense? And that is the question that interests this person the most. But you may have answered quite a bit of that in what please.
Well, and that's like it's interesting with the, common sense. And I do think it's interesting, this context aware as these systems become, I've even better at understanding sort of what your kind of common sense and what's important to you in answering a given question. They are getting better at that. For instance, I'll use ChatGPT, a separate system for personal and work, just because I'm doing so much with this. And I will, again, when you can say that it would be, reach a certain threshold is I think hard to say, but I am noticing that there are improvements when it's getting better at answering something in a way that I would have, and not just sounding so, I don't know, like vanilla, and being able to, in a way that for me, like professionally, bringing in, the context of legal education, or you might want to look at it this way, and bringing it something from pedagogy, or so it's as they become better at understanding what you want answers to focus on, and things like, they are getting better at, being able to give custom instructions. Do not tell me when you don't know the answer. Don't tell me what I want to hear. The tendency to be, that these models to just like, great question, Aaron, you're amazing.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
I give a lot of custom instructions. I don't want that. I don't, so I think there are increasing abilities to give instructions and context to the models to get better answers.
Wow, thank you. And we do have a couple more questions, but I want to value your time. So if it's a
For sure.
how how are your students handling this? Are they learning legal concepts? Is writing improving or getting worse?
Well, I mean, there's here at Berkeley Law, there's so many, people working in this space, and with students using it in different ways. I mean, we do at the library work closely with the first year legal research and writing program. Um, and in doing that, I think students are really receptive, have been receptive here. I think to the notion that you, for instance, with legal research, you have to understand the traditional methods of legal research before you jump into generative AI, because you're only going to shortchange yourself if you're not learning, right? If you're that,
Hmm.
you know, and for instance, I talked about that Ethan Malik blog post, the times when you don't want to use AI. One of it is when you're trying to understand and synthesize knowledge, critical thinking. It does seem like the students I work with get it, that if you use Gen AI to understand or try to just quickly learn like a doctrinal area of law, that's that's not going to work so well. That you have to do that deep thinking, right? But and you have to learn the traditional methods of legal research. But then that being said, because the reality that these tools are here, there's also, a lot of effort to try to then, talk about like, okay, so when you go to your summer associate position, you go to work, you're working at San Francisco Law Library, how can you use these tools responsibly? So I know there have been a lot of studies about, so and that's kind of my personal take on it. There are a lot of studies on, increased, rates of that, for instance, that it can really help students who have English as a second language improve some skills, but that it can, there are, areas where there's a big study on critical thinking skills where, students who were engaging with these tools a lot, some of the critical thinking skills were decreasing. So it's still so broad that I think, and when you talk about, law school versus, college and, other higher education settings, I think it's varying quite a bit.
Okay, thanks. And we had one more question in the chat.
Yeah.
Do you recommend any subject matter experts or resources on the regulation of AI, particularly on the local or state level? And most media outlets are focused on what the EU is doing.
Yes. So, well, there are and in the materials I have in the Zotero file, I've got a section on regulation. So there's so much going on right now. I mean, just these couple weeks with in the federal level. Yeah, the EU has been paving the way on a lot of issues, and then state governments, local governments are creating regulation. We have experts here at Berkeley Law, and in that, I'll make sure in the I can't. There's not one point person because it's so complex, right? But for instance, one of the I cited some of Professor Colleen Chen's work. She teaches a class in AI regulation, and she's got some great resources. But I have some of those in the materials.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you so much.